Hi, I'm Phil. Whoa! It looks like you've got a lot going on here. You must be feeling a little overwhelmed. Uncertainty is a workplace norm, and increasingly, it's a life norm too. I've been in your shoes, and I know how it feels, but you don't have to go it alone. I can help. I wrote Change on the Run for people leading and navigating change, strapped for time and desperate for something to help them know what to do now, the very thing I needed and couldn't find back when I was first you. Change on the Run meets you in the trenches, giving you 44 change hacks to choose from and implement immediately. Learn through years of trial and error and successes and failures, helping you get from where you are to where you need to be as quickly and painlessly as possible. Think of it as your pocket change coach, packed with practical advice and down-to-earth techniques, free of theory, meandering process, and jargon, designed to get you out of change jams fast. So if you've recently been given a role on a change initiative or trying to find your way through a transition you're already in, Change on the Run is likely the little orange book for you. Change on the Run, 44 Ways to Survive Workplace Uncertainty, available March 2nd, everywhere. Let's start lining them up and knocking them down. Check out changeontherun.com for more details. Hi, I'm Phil, and welcome to the Change on the Run book launch event. Thank you very much for being here. It was 8 years ago when I launched my first book, Change with Confidence. And at that time, I'd just come off of a major change initiative, and I hired a PR firm to help me sort of spread the word out because I didn't really have a platform. I had 260 LinkedIn connections. I hadn't started a blog yet, but I had a book that I wanted to get out. And it was a great move. And as I was meeting with the team and trying to figure out the PR thing, I was asking tons of questions. And I kept saying, what about this? What about this? And at the end of every meeting, I'd say, and what else? And the gentleman, David Hahn, said, Phil, there's nothing else. And it became a joke of ours that, and I remember once I was in their New York office, I was with my friend Peter, we were working in New Jersey, and it just kept on and on to be a joke. So at the end of the campaign, we had said our goodbyes, and I said, oh, David, there's one more thing. What else? And he said, Phil, there's two types of first-time authors. The first author will write a book, the next book, his second book or her second book, in 2 years' time. And the other author will wait 5 years before they start writing their next one. So the first book, the one that's done quite quickly, 75% of the content will be a rehash of the first book. But the second book will be something very different and very unique. So 5 years after I had that conversation, I started thinking about what's the next book I could write, because I'd spent tons of time with global clients working on change. I'd changed some of my views that I'd written in Change with Confidence. So what could I write? But the world had changed. And what happened is that, people were busier. There was more change. The pace of change was going incredibly high. And also, people were taking in information a lot differently as well. They were scanning instead of reading books. And it was interesting, there was more data on how people were taking in information. The first one is people were reading less. Although they bought business books, there's one survey that says you read 20 to 40% of the business books you buy. And I know that's definitely true for me. Another one was saying, even if you start reading it, most people rarely get beyond the first chapter. And then there's also another great quote from Josh Bersin, who's a management consultant, that said, we spend on average 25 minutes on personal development each week. And that's 1% of our work time. But I didn't want to write a book that nobody would read and they wouldn't find of benefit. So I started diving into research from neuroscience to how kids read to how to keep people's attention within a book. And then I went to sort of on a safari, on a sort of research safari in Indigo in Canada, in Independence, and Barnes and Nobles in the States. And I was watching how people were actually interacting with books. And then I'd also interview some of the sales reps if I saw something, well, what's going on here? And they were the experts. And I knew what my goal was, is to give people quick tips, change hacks, since they don't have a lot of time. And most of the people I've worked with, when they're thrown onto a change project, either they're doing their day job and they're doing this as an added growth activity, or they're on a secondment and they're working night and day, and they don't have time to read a lot of books. So how could I create a book that could dip in, dip out, get just what you needed, and then to move forward? So that was my goal. And I started, it took me 18 months to write the first draft of it, because I was working full time in my consulting business, and nights and weekends, I was writing my next book. So after that, I had my first draft, and I gave it to my friend Mel, who did the first sentence check edit, and then made some great changes. Then I was talking to friends like my friend Tim and saying, does this really make sense? And then I actually expanded it to 20 early readers who read the whole book, a prototype of it, provided feedback. I did tons of edits, great edits. And then I gave it to my editor for Change with Confidence, Ken Alexander, and he did the first substantive edit on the book. So I had my manuscript, and now I needed to find a publisher. And one thing I did not want to do, it's a 3-year journey. I didn't want to compromise on the concept. I didn't want to make changes to sort of dilute it so that it would get sales, or it would be picked up by a publisher, or it would be on the shelf. I had a really good gut feel of what needed to be done, especially with the early readers. So I started looking for a publisher, and all roads led to Page 2 Books. And just at that time, there's a thought leader called MBS. He'd written a great article about publishing, and he had used Page 2. They'd just been profiled with one of their teams, or one of their authors, Joe Jackman, in the Globe and Mail in Canada. And one of my friends, who I hadn't talked to in so long, she was actually publishing a book with them at that time. So it was great. We had our first meeting, and I wanted a partner to realize my vision. So tonight, what I'd like to do is give you different glimpses of the process from starting out working with Page 2, working with the pros with heart, I call them, and just to give you a glimpse, if you've ever wanted to do something like this yourself, or if you're just curious what goes in to creating a book from vision to actual book on shelf or an audiobook, this is what I'd like to share today. And so I'll be showing you some videos, and they're taken from a conversation with Peter Cocking, the art director from Page 2, multi-award winner. I think he's half architect, half artist, and half linguist, if that's possible. But I wanted you to have a feeling of the professionals talking about the perspective, instead of me, the author, who's far too close to my dream. So the first one we're going to talk about is really what happens when an author comes and says, I've got a dream, I've got a vision, over to you. Peter, when we first met, there was a kickoff meeting with the Page 2 team, and where I presented the concept for Change on the Run. That I think at the time, I knew what I was looking for, but I really just didn't have the abilities to bring it to life. And I knew that, which was the exciting part of the kickoff meeting. And as I presented it to you, the book concept was, the big idea was taking the 80-20 principle, given that, the people that I was writing for had been thrown onto a change initiative. They had no time to learn, but they knew that they had a gap in skills. So if they could just do one thing for a change challenge that they'd come across, then they could do that one thing and move on to the next. So any thoughts that came to you to mind?
Sure. I actually remember even before this that Amanda Lewis, the editor, and I had gone through like the prototype. You had done a green covered prototype, which I think you show parts of in this presentation. And we'd gone through that, and we were definitely struck by this 80-20 idea, right? And I think that we thought that that's something that we all could take even further in that, the move to try and how do we make this information, as accessible and simple as and clear as possible, which is where you were obviously going from the beginning. And so that I think was a big inspiration. And the other thing is that, you had kind of a visual idea, right? And that, this is something we don't necessarily, see or even expect from authors. I always would tell them that, we'll ask them if, like, so I'll ask an author, for example, if you've, ever fallen asleep dreaming about what your cover looks like. And every now and then someone will say, I saw yellow. But many people don't, and that's fine. That's not their job. And we of course think it, that this is something we think we bring to the table, but we do want to find out, obviously, if an author does have a vision, because sometimes that's really useful. In this case, because you've gone to the level of like a prototype and testing something, we had really something to look at between that and between this presentation right here. And there was really something there, I think, that, the initial concept of sort of this kind of stick sort of figure, a way to suggest kind of humanity in as inclusive, I guess, as we really can be with an illustration. That by being really open-ended, which is nice about that. So that concept was interesting. And there was a general, an attempt to kind of make everything seem warm and friendly. That's kind of the road you'd started on. And so that for me was, between the prototype book and this presentation, it was those things of really trying to kind of keep that 80-20 approach in mind, that even visually, that everything seemed very accessible, right? That it was not going to seem like dense, so that you just go, well, I can't get through any of this, so I'm going to get nothing out of it, right? We want to really avoid that. And to pick up on where you'd started to go with this sort of kind of, human-centered sort of warm feeling, right, into the design. And those were really, in this case, I would say, yeah, the core of the design concept in many ways came from your initial presentation material, right? That was really inspirational for us, I think.
So I talked about early readers and how important they were in the conception of what the book would be and what would have high utility for people. And I took it really seriously, and I didn't want it to be, why don't you change this and not do it? And it's funny, I had the first prototype had 65 chapters, and most people are 65. This is supposed to be a quick tip advice. People will never find things, so we got rid of 20 chapters. But I wanted it to be, as we went through this, I wanted it to be developed through the lens of design thinking. And design thinking is the belief that everything you do is around the consumer or the reader. And I know my friend Banaz is an expert in this field, and she helped me a lot. But if you really are serious about writing or creating something for someone, they have to guide what it looks like, what it feels like. So with the 20 different people that were part of this team, what you need to give up is your first choice, and oftentimes. And so people got to vote on what the subtitle was. They got to vote on what the cover looked like. They got to vote on the stick figure and how it looked. And they also got to vote on sort of the overall look of the book. So what I'd like to know is, we'll go back to Peter and just talk about, well, how does it work when you really aren't driving the truck? And nor Peter nor I was, it was the team of 20. So let's take another look at the video. It was really important for me to have potential readers decide on the different elements, the ones that they preferred, and to get feedback for them. So there was a list of early readers. There were early career versus seasoned professionals, librarians, educators. My hope was that it would give a balanced view of what made sense for the concept that you mentioned, and also what we're going through. And at times there were, the team suggested things that would have been my second or third choice, and I think yours as well. I think we were very aligned on what we thought, we kind of liked the most, but the broader group chose an inflection of that. Does that happen a lot with you? Or
I mean, yeah, we've seen authors do cover testing. I don't think I've ever seen anyone do testing to this this extent, or I think this kind of this well thought out in some ways, right? In that, you know, I think it was really important that you had been paying attention to getting a good range of people, right? And, you know, people that reflected, like, as you've got here, your target audience and things like that. And then as you and I were talking before, this idea of like really trying to avoid, or I think it was putting the thumb on the scale of like, you know, seeing what people actually say, right, and then responding to it. And you know, I think when we see this kind of thing, you know, you also want to know if people are giving some reasons. And you had, you know, in certainly later when we saw some of the test results, the response, people gave some information, right, beyond just I like this, I like that, because that can be useful too. Is that sometimes, for example, you know, if you found let's say again, we were testing a cover and we found there were a couple of or not comments, but you know, ratings that went way away from like the norm. It's useful to know why. You know, sometimes it could be someone is just reflecting something that's, you know, like an admitted personal prejudice that you know isn't relevant. Like they would go like, oh, I don't like green, so I just, you know, didn't like the cover regardless, right? And you can always say, well, you know, that's like an outlier if you have that kind of thing. And so having that bit of reasoning, I think, in there, which not everybody does, I think that's really useful because it helps you analyze, you know, how useful the results are going forward.
So now I'd like to take us, if we could double click on the design, because as I mentioned earlier, it had to have high use. You have to be able to grab the book, open it quickly, find what you need, again, to make it quick, but also to remove the barrier of frustration, or I just don't have time, I'll come back later, and never come back. And then there were two elements that I'd like to talk about. The first one were the stick figures that you see behind me and that Peter mentioned. And where they come from is actually from training. And in a lot of the change assignments I've done that have had, you know, training elements to it, and we're doing train the trainers, but doing them globally. So a lot of the people that would be doing the training, English would be a second language or maybe even a third language. And we knew that the nuances of the quotes of what you would say when you're in front of the flip chart, that you could miss some of those details, but nobody missed these little stick figures around a flip chart or people at a wall and where they were situated in position. And they became actually a better communicator than the words in the facilitator's guide. So that became a really, really important symbol of giving people sort of the focus of what this, you know, change hack is all about. And the second part is really about the pages, and they had to be really easy to read and to get your information in a consistent format. So we're going to show you two videos with Peter, and first one is on the character and the second one is on the page design.
One of the real kind of challenges, I think, was what do we do to bring this kind of this stick figure idea, to kind of bring it a bit to life, right? And that, you know, to keep it really simple so that it is this, you know, kind of fairly inclusive sort of figure, but to give it a little bit of character and to give it kind of a little bit of kind of sort of warmth and energy and so on. So, you know, these were the illustrator I worked with, the woman named Michelle Clement, who I've worked with on, she's actually a student of mine many years ago, and worked with her on quite a few projects over the years. This is a good kind of overall reference of what you had provided, Phil, from your initial prototype of kind of, you know, content illustrations, right, of the different poses and what was being shown, what we're communicating with each one. So we started with this, and of course these are, they're fairly monoline. The figures are quite slim, right, in terms of the line weights and the strokes and so on. So, you know, initially when I had given Michelle the initial samples, that's sort of what, you know, she was looking at as well, and sort of so began by, I think, making the figures a little bit wider themselves, making the heads a little bit smaller, but we kept this initial kind of thinner line. And I think you had looked at these. We looked at these, and there was kind of a couple of things we were, going back and forth on. Even simple things like the rounding of the arms versus kind of the sharper angles. Was there some kind of hand sort of gesture? But I remember that, all in all, these were sort of seeming a little bit too, wispy, too thin, and for some reason that didn't seem to have quite as much of that kind of warmth, right? That I think we were all looking for in this. Then we ended up with looking at samples more like this, where we were looking at different weights of the figures from this sort of thinner weight. We started with a very thick weight, and where we ended up was really more of this kind of in-between weight. You with the initial concept of let's have this very simple stick figure, and then with kind of our iteration of it to try and, give this characterless character some character, if you know what I mean. I think when I look at D here, for example, I see, particularly in the second figure, I mean, it's just a series of simple lines, but there is a real feeling of some character. But you can see, I think, there too, nicely in black and white, the relationship between the figures and this kind of rounded hand we ended up with too is shown, and the typeface as well, that there's a nice relationship for them. And I think when we see the figure large like this, just simple gestures, the hand and so on, there really is that sense of character, I think, that people were able to identify with. If I go through parts of it, with opening with like the half title page and then sort of the title page, where, it's something I always like to do when you can, which is to kind of explode the cover a little bit. It's sort of funny. It was common enough in like the mid-century, the sort of 50s, 60s books, for people to use the title page spread, but it kind of fell out of fashion. And I always wondered why, because you've got this left-hand page. So, when it works, it doesn't always work, but it's nice to say, can we take the cover idea and exaggerate it across the horizontal plane? Because we're running horizontally on the cover, it seemed perfect to be able to expand that. Yeah, and this, I think, back and forth between these, you can see how, we've got this sort of feeling of kind of the loose friendliness of hand lettering, but when we see it, like particularly in the serif iteration here, it also has the readability of a text sort of typeface. And I think that was sort of part of the whole process, was keeping that warmth, making sure it was good and readable, and making sure even the fullest pages, like we get to something like this, are not too full, that so that we had some nice white space. We ended up with, I think you and I, had talked about the funny tricks of the shape of wanting to keep it square, which is you'd start with in testing, and then I ended up, I think, pushing to make it just a tiny bit larger so we could keep that white space, so that we didn't have, even on the kind of the busiest sort of pages, we could keep them from being too busy and to keep them kind of light. And sometimes I think we just added half an inch, but
Yes,
that
that's
extra
right, just a half
space
an inch
can be
around.
useful in some cases on some of the, the fuller pages, right? Yeah, and this is another example when we can see this figure large, that, you see that sense of a kind of personality coming through, which sounds like people were responding to. It looks like if you're going through this and you're someone who is, a harried change manager or anything else, it's like, I can read this quickly, right? And the way it's organized, of course, in the short numbered sections, also, I think, encourages and facilitates that. It doesn't seem too daunting when you look through it. And then, again, the same idea of, we kind of repeat this pattern, actually, of on the left-hand pages, of having slightly larger sort of scannable text, either in a bullet point manner. Even these, they're not bullet points, but they've got these graphics that pull them out. So they have that aspect too. So the left hand is sort of scannable. The right hand is kind of information and assignment in a way, or where you fill out or respond to the work, and the type is a bit smaller to make sure that we have comfortable room for all this information, again, without it seeming kind of too crowded. And that's really the pattern that kind of runs through the whole thing, with these kind of the little kind of vibrant interruptions that you've got. I'll move through till we've go on, and roughly evenly, yeah, we have these kinds of things. We have 20% completed with kind of nice interruptions where there's, again, a nice break with a bit of white space, some graphic, graphic treatment. And so it's a bit different for the treatment of these headings. And it just, I think, allowed, a nice interruption. And that was all part of like just responding to your text and your kind of preliminary draft of, how do we keep this pacing open enough, but also consistent, so you don't suddenly get something that's too uneven. You always want to have a relatively even sort of texture, even in something like this, so you don't end up with, a page with just like a couple of lines on it, and like that's sort of jarring to people, because, this is a challenging subject for some people. So you want to make them feel comfortable all the way through, I think. And that's sort of what you were doing with the text, and we wanted to do with the design as well.
So that's the design. And thank you, Peter, and thank you, Michelle, your masters, and you brought the vision to life, which has been tremendous. Let's talk about motivation, because when you go on this journey, you're giving up your nights and weekends. There's a lot of stuff to do, and you're just kind of going to your computer and making it happen. And for me, it was giving myself a big challenge on the side that I could try and make, and it would get me energized and keep me going. And for that one there, it was actually to have a rock star to endorse my book. And it seemed like a grand enough one for me. And the challenge was that how do you actually get a rock star to endorse you? And for me, it was David Lee Roth. And David Lee Roth was a foundation of my youth in my teen years and in my early 20s and even up to now. And he had that personality of do the best with what you've got and always punch above your weight and try and be the best that you can be and go for it. And I think that to me, it's helped me in my life to push myself just a little bit further than I would like to do, and sometimes just pushing me all the way into doing a new and scary territory that has been great for me in the long run. So this was the challenge. So where did it all begin? It really began with an initial chat with Chris Brandt, who's the marketing strategist at Page Two. And we had our first meeting 9 months before the launch. So 9 months ago, had our first meeting, we're talking, and he actually comes from a music industry background. And so Chris and I were talking. We found out we both like Van Halen, and we both like David Lee Roth, and we both were at the same the concert, the Skyscraper concert. He was 5 weeks before me, but we had something to share together. So we laughing. I think Chris said, wouldn't it be great if David Lee Roth endorsed your book? And we laughed, and that was really funny. And yeah, what a great joke. And it was a really funny joke until I got this email. Chris was serious. He wanted to go for it. I'm in. So again, okay, yeah, let's try it. It'll be kind of good. So that was it. But kind of an intention turned into a quest when I got this in the mail. Chris's vintage 1985 cassette of Eat 'em and Smile, the first album of David Lee Roth. He gave me his prized possession. And sometimes I hold it close to my heart, but definitely I always looked at it every day. So we are in, game on. We're going to go for Dave. And again, it made a lot of sense from a business. He's always had a business side to him. He's on many boards. He runs a lot of businesses that usually he doesn't talk about. I'm sure we could make it work. So strategy number one, let's go to his manager, because that made perfect sense. He's the gatekeeper. He has easy contact with Dave. If we can approach him, he'll approach Dave. We'll make the connection and everything will work. Until we got this note back that Chris got back from the manager. So you got to admit, a note like this, it doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room to negotiate kind of when we're going to talk to Dave. So we go, okay, strategy number one, not working. Let's go to strategy number two. Let's go to the publicist, because their job is to really amplify him. And Dave's even asking for us because on his website, he's got a contact. So we looked at the company, and what we decided to do is do a little bit more intel before we approach this time. And although all roads lead to Page Two Books, all roads also lead to LinkedIn. So what we did is we looked at all the people from the PR firm that were on LinkedIn to look at a connection. Was there a connection there that, 6 degrees of connection? And lo and behold, this person that was living in LA, she'd actually grown up and had been in public school in Vancouver. So I typed a note to Chris and said, Eureka, we've got it. Take your kids, move them out of whatever public school they're in, move them to this one. We'll send a note. We'll say we have so much in common and we'll get it. Sometimes you can go too far. And there's 3 problems with that strategy. 1, Chris's kids were far younger than that. They're preschool. 2, I don't have a lot of influence with Chris's wife because we've never met. And 3, it's just a lousy plan. So what did we do next? Let's go big. Let's go to social media. So we decided that a strategy that if we could start posting and then actually including the hashtag of David Lee Roth, then maybe he would be intrigued and he'd say, let's do it. So then we started posting things like this, some quotes, trying to connect it, Change on the Run's my second book, Skyscraper was his, second record. You get the connection. Crickets. It wasn't working. So we had to go even further. So what we did is we went straight to Dave. And what we did is we tried to find out where David Lee Roth lived. And you might say, well, how do you know where a rock star lives? Couldn't tell you, but this is what we did. This is our step-by-step fact base. He's got a wonderful autobiography called Crazy from the Heat. In it, there's a story where he describes his mansion in Pasadena, California. He also talks about his roof and he talks about the wall around it. Went to and found that there was another connection in a building, an architectural sort of gem in the same area, found that address. Started going through Google Street View, trying to find out a house that would look close to it. And lo and behold, after lots of street walking, we found one that we thought could resemble the one that had been described by Dave. So then the question is, what do you send Dave other than the book to try and get him to endorse him? So what we did, and what I did, is I created a scrapbook of my history with Dave and the impact that it would have on him, on me. And so what I did is I created this and I walked through my life with Dave and everything from with my buddy Dan growing up and sort of dressing like David Lee Roth and filming ourselves lip syncing to even kind of doing high kicks like he did to motivate sales teams in the past. So that the feeling was, and the pitch was, hey, you've really inspired me. This is something that could help a lot of people. What do you think? But you know that a book is only as good as its cover. So the packaging that we wanted to send, and what I got was some great packaging that 3M had just released. And I thought, hey, Dave will look at it. He'll go, cool packaging, and open it immediately. Did I give Dave the cassette, the value cassette? Absolutely not. It's in the picture for dramatic effect. So we sent it off to Dave, and it's been 3 months. We haven't heard anything. But in the true David Lee Roth spirit, it's never over until it's over. So we had one more strategy to try: the live plea. Dave, if you're listening to this right now, it'd mean a lot to me if you could endorse Change on the Run. There's still time. We can sticker the books in the US, Canada, and the UK warehouses. It would mean a lot. Thanks a lot in advance. So that is the quest, and everyone should have one. And we're talking about music, and we're talking about sound, and audiobooks are such an important learning tool these days. They're huge, and perhaps because you can multitask while you're doing it, you can go for a run, you can do your work, you can do whatever you want and learn at the same time. So we decided to do an audio version, and in January, there were 3 sessions of 5 hours each where I read the book, but it wasn't the same book, because in the audio version, you're painting word pictures, you're really illustrating through words certain images that will help people learn as they're going through change. So there were substantive edits to it. And even something like if I referred to they, and they say, well, who are they? And it might be prevalent and easy to know when you're looking at a book, but definitely not when you're just hearing it and doing other things. So it was tough for me. I'm not a good reader. And even as I was a kid, I struggled with reading out loud in class in grade 5. But the great team helped me out. And I think we're really happy with the final product. So here's a quick glimpse of being in the studio recording Change on the Run. Hi, I'm Phil Buckley, and I'm at the Post Office Sound Studio in downtown Toronto, and I'm on day 2 of recording the audiobook version of Change on the Run that's coming out March 2nd, pre-sale February 2nd. I thought you'd get a kick out of taking a look at what the studio is and what it's like to record a book. So let's take a look. So we're in the sound studio right now, and I'd like to introduce you to Evan, our sound engineer. Evan, how's it going?
It's going great. This has been a lot of fun.
Oh, thanks. It's been great. And while we're actually recording, we also have Julia, the director, that's patched in as well. So as I'm reading, if there's any mistakes or any coaching, both of them can hear what is being recorded and then also make any corrections, and then we'll redo things that just don't make any sense or aren't the best that they can be. Any thoughts from you, Evan? You've been with me for 10 hours so far.
It's been a breeze. It's gone by like that, right?
It's been a lot of fun.
No,
Thanks so much for your help.
For sure, you're welcome.
Okay, let's take a look at the studio. So what happens is I can hear from the booth to me, and I just read, and then once I read, and then if I keep going until basically there's an error or we stop at a certain section, and then I keep going on. And I didn't really know what to expect when I was going into it, and I was a bit, self-conscious about reading out loud and how that would be. But actually, once you do it for a while, you flip into a pace that becomes your own, and it becomes more comfortable. But the first half an hour was definitely a challenge. Okay, so I'll just give you a quick couple of lines of how it works. Chapter 36. Another skill that influences your ability to succeed is negotiating deadlines. As we discussed earlier, when creating a change plan, project timelines include the end dates of all activities and tasks required to complete them. So that's what I do for 5 hours, and in one more day, we'll have the whole thing set and done and ready to go. So that's it, day 2 of the studio. And day 3 is in 2 days' time, and then we'll be all set. So I hope you've enjoyed taking a look at the studio and what I'm going through to have another version, the audio version of the book, and I hope you enjoy it when it comes out. Thanks for watching. So in both the print book as well as in the audio book, I've put in what we call pattern breaks, or I think as Peter had said, these interruptions. And the reason is that when you're reading and you're sort of going in one way, if you actually sort of disrupt what you're doing, even for a second, that it actually energizes you and it gives you more esteem and more focus in the moment. And so we put that every 4 or 5 chapters. And my favorite one was called the Bongo solo. And when I was growing up as a kid in the 70s, like every rec room had a pair of bongos. They'd have maybe maracas, and they'd have maybe a tambourine. But I was always fascinated with the bongo because you could kind of pick it up and kind of try and find a beat. And I was so absorbed in it. And I think, from a mindfulness standpoint and being in the moment, I know, Nina, you're watching now and you're the expert here. But I wanted to give people a sense of just changing and focusing and re-energizing. So that's what we did. And we recreated the bongo in it, sort of that bongo activity in the audio book. And to do that, actually, I found Adam Hay, which is a professional drummer and a drumming instructor. And he joined me in the studio so that we could do a little bit of a lesson. So I'd just like to introduce you to Adam now. Adam, how are you doing?
I'm great. Let's see if I can get my video. Hey!
Adam, thank you so much. And Adam, you're so hard to find. You think that, oh yeah, you could, a bongo instructor, but thanks to my cousin Gord, who, through friends of yours and found you, and thanks so much for taking it on. It's just tremendous.
My pleasure, and congratulations.
Thank you so much. And what we thought we'd do was a little bit of a lesson. And I asked Adam if he could teach me a beat on an 80s song called Shattered Dreams by Johnny Hates Jazz. And as I was writing the book, I was, I heard this on YouTube and it became an earworm. And then, I started singing it and, Shattered Dreams. And then my wife Barb started singing it. And how do we get this out of our head? But it almost became a theme song. So you taught me a few bits, but I was wondering if you could show the listeners and the watchers kind of how you go about just kind of starting to train someone with bongos. And I had no experience before. So how would you approach it?
The first thing I do is I convince them to slow everything down and instill the law, the rule, which is the slower you go, the faster you learn it. So, for example, in this rhythm, you have the right hand is playing the lower pitched drums, the left hand is playing the higher pitched drums. And I would teach a student how to find that melody, assign it per drum, and then to learn it linearly. That's one thing at a time.
Very, very cool. So should I just try something here, or do you want to just take me through the first beat, or what do you think? What's good for you?
Show us what you got, Funky Phil.
Okay. So after 3 months of practice, here we go. Thank you very much.
Crowd goes crazy.
Thank you very much. And it seems like it's really easy to do and no big deal, but it took months to do that. And to do it just by, hey, I can go and do it. Why do you think it's so tough to actually teach people how to get rhythm in their head? Because counting it off for me didn't work. Trying to memorize it and 1 2 2 2 2 1 2 2 1, that didn't work for me. Why is it so tough?
Well, I think in this day and age, we expect results immediately, and we're not used to the frustration of being a beginner. There's an advantage of being a beginner if you really let everything go and just accept and surrender to that. But once you start to expect those results, then the mistakes start to hurt a little bit.
No, it's not true.
Yeah.
I think there's an analogy there with change. And again, I wrote the book for people thrown in change and they just kind of want to be perfect, and there's no perfect. And then you just start flailing and it only gets worse. So thank you so much. And thank you for being on today and also for recording with me. That's so great.
My pleasure. Congratulations, Phil.
Thanks, Adam. And you're probably wondering, watching, saying, well, how can I become a bongo Sarah like Phil, and most likely more like Adam? And so we decided that we would create bongo prize packs for you so that some of the lucky winners can actually go. See you later, Adam. Thanks for being on. So what we did is we decided that we're going to have 4 bongo prize packs to thank you so much for being on today. And you might say, well, what's in a bongo prize pack? Well, the first thing you get in a bongo prize pack is hip bongo drums, just like you saw it being demonstrated by me. So you get a pair of bongo drums. It comes with a carrying case. It comes with a wrench. Actually, I haven't asked Adam what to do with the wrench yet, but you get your very own pair of drums. And what else do you get in a bongo pack? You get a First Lessons bongo book that is illustrated, and it comes with 24/7 help desk support. So if you're ever in trouble, you can definitely go to an aid, but it is the best book about getting started. And again, as Adam said, trying to be perfect never works in change, nor will it work in bongos. What else do you get? You get a limited edition Change on the Run book light in case that there's a power outage, you want to play the bongos, and you're not going to be able to be stopped. You can do it anyway. I know it doesn't fit, but I thought it would be fun to throw in the pack. And the last thing, and I think the most important thing of what you get in the bongo pack, is a 45-minute virtual bongo lesson with Adam Hay. And this is great because we were doing this just back and forth. And not only did I find it a really enjoyable feeling of having someone coaching me through, he's an excellent coach, but I also felt that I was doing something and getting a little bit better, and it kept me mindful so that I could just focus and be on the present. So that is what the Bongo Pack is. We have 4, and what we did before the show is we actually did a random generator with everyone who had registered for the show, and we have 4 lucky winners. So the winners are Aviva Grohl, congratulations, Glenn Roberts McCabe, Michelle Sangillo, and Nora Kelly. So congratulations, I'll contact all of you about how you'll receive your Bongo Packs, but I hope they'll give you as much joy as they have for me. So as we come to a close, it's been a lot of fun, and thank you so much for being part of the show today and sort of sharing the celebration of this and the kickoff. But I don't want to lose the very serious point of why I wrote the book. And I just saw so many people who were fearful in change, and it was the first time, I realized that when people go through change, that they're actually afraid. I was doing a workshop once and I saw someone who just had this look on her face of, I don't know what I'm going to do. And that inspired me for my career. And that inspired me to write this book. So change is tough. It's really difficult. And how we can help people get to the other side and survive, but also be successful and thrive as well is important. So if you do pick up the book and if you do think it's of value, if you could please write a review on your retailer site or on Goodreads, because what it does is it directly impacts the shareability on the site. So if you're buying one book and there are reviews, then there's a higher incidence that it will come up as you might also want to consider. And that's the way to shout it out so that as many people can take a look at it to see if it's right for them. So thank you so much for being part of this event today. I really hope that you like the book when you look at it. And I really wish you all the best as you continue to lead change. Thank you so much for being here.